the mindset has not been one that has been as inclusive as it should have been or could have been. I do believe that there has been a lack of appreciation that, for better or for worse, this city's majority African American population is going to have to share in the growth of this community. There seems to be, it's sort of been generational, that this can be done without them being a part of it. And I think, one, that's the difference between Atlanta and Memphis in a nutshell, is that Atlanta figured out how to get everybody involved in the game and at the table. And here we're still dealing with the issue of whether or not a group of people are going to be brought to the table. It's impossible. The destiny of Memphis is tied to what is going to happen with the majority African American population here. I think it's in everybody's best interest to figure out how we can be the next Atlanta. I think we have basically sort of lamented the fact that Atlanta passed us by. We were all at the same point once upon a time, and historically that is true. We were actually more of a mecca in the country than Atlanta was for a period of time. But Atlanta figured out something that we didn't. Atlanta figured out that you can't compete nationally, regionally, nationally, or internationally with half your population not being productive and contributing. We have approximately half of our population that's non-productive and contributing here. And we are unwilling, have been unwilling, to address it. The issue of crime, I use the example all the time that you show me a man that's making $40,000 a year and I'll show you somebody that's not going to be involved in crime. Because if you're making $40,000 a year, you've got enough to have a stake in the American dream where you can have a house and you can have a car and you can have some things. And so you're willing to work and have that quality of life. I think most of us would agree. People making $40,000 a year are not the ones usually out committing crime. Usually. There's some who may, but usually. So the game that we find ourselves caught in is our unwillingness to make a front-end investment in order to reduce a back-end problem. And you hear it all the time here in Memphis, yeah, we need to invest more in after-school programs. Yeah, we need to invest more in community centers. Yeah, but it costs too much. Taxes are too high. Well, the fact of the matter is taxes are not nearly as high as they're going to be if we don't make those kinds of investments. It costs more, we all know, to keep a person locked up than it does to send the kid to after-school program or to send the kid to a community center or to give a kid a first-rate education. In my tenure as an elected official here, I can tell you that, what are you talking about, $25,000, $30,000, $40,000 a year to keep somebody locked up. You think taxes are high now, wait till you start trying to lock your way up out of the problem of crime. Even our sheriff, our DA, our governor, everybody saying you can't lock your way up. You can't lock people up and get out of this problem. It's not going to happen because we don't have the resources to lock people up. So what is a more reasonable solution? A more reasonable solution is to begin to invest in these folks. Yes, a front-end investment means that you have to pay a little bit more right now, but let's invest in a better educational process. Let's invest in after-school programs. Let's invest in more community centers. Let's do what we are trying to do in Frazier, where we're taking a problem and we're saying, hey, we want to reduce crime, but here's a solution that might reduce the crime. Instead of basically just trying to lock everybody up, why don't we get neighbors to start looking out for each other? And why don't we go back to the old-fashioned block clubs and having block captains and neighborhood watch coordinators? And why don't we basically encourage them to do this by offering them an opportunity? If you do this kind of thing in your block, then your kid can get a scholarship to go to an after-school program. And that after-school program for your elementary kid, 3rd through 5th grade, will help improve his academics so that maybe he can do better and go on to a higher educational level of attainment. But in the meantime, you know, you're looking out trying to make sure the neighborhood's safe. You're engaging your neighbors. You're getting to know what Miss Jones is doing. You're getting to know if Mr. Harris is sick and he hadn't been out in 3 days. We're getting back to checking on each other, and your kid's getting a benefit. And then why don't we take the kids who are able and pay them to tutor the high school kids and pay them to tutor the kids in the elementary school? Have them to do something productive, use their higher education, they're in 11th and 12th graders, and have them to tutor kids in the elementary school. And then those kids that are not able to tutor, who may get into trouble, why don't we give them some jobs? A lot of these kids don't work because they don't have a work ethic. A lot of them have not been shown that there's a reward for hard work. You work, you earn. You earn, this is what you get. You may say, well, that's not a smart thing. It's going to be very costly. Well, look, whether you like it or not, the President of the United States had an economic stimulus program, create jobs. If it was good enough to create jobs for adults to get the economy spurred, then tell me why it's not good to give kids, and I'm talking about working age kids, I'm not talking about child labor, to give kids some jobs so that they stay out of trouble. Because in the end, when they get into trouble, it's going to cost you more than the job would have cost. And you're also preparing them by giving them a work ethic, giving them something to get used to, because that's one of the things that we all agree. A lot of these kids have not had a work ethic. They don't see people in their house going to work because in many instances, there's no dad in the house that's working. They see mom going, but a lot of these young African-American males don't see it. So we need to do that. Is that the solution for all of our problems? No. But I will say this. We can invest more on the front end that will help us begin to get to be like in Atlanta. Part of what I suggest is that when I was a city councilman, we kept community centers open to 9 o'clock at night on the weekdays and 6 o'clock on Saturdays. Community centers now stay open to 6 o'clock on weekdays and 2 o'clock on Saturdays. Ask yourself, how many kids do you know on Saturday are going to get up before 10 or 11, and if the community center closes at 2, what the heck are they going to do after 2? Community centers closing at 6 o'clock on weekdays. They get out of school at 4. By the time they get to the community center, it's about to close. Why can't we invest in keeping the community centers open until 9? Why can't we invest in keeping the community centers open until 6 on Saturdays? Simple. We did it once before as a community. We had the will to do it. We found the dollars to do it. That's the kind of thing that I'm saying can make a difference. Will it keep all the gang stuff down? Will it prevent some of the violence that we've seen that's been so prevalent in recent times? It won't stop all of it, but I guarantee you, as we all know, when we were kids ourselves, you don't have anything to do. Idle mind is the devil's workshop. That's an old saying. I mean, you know, even the best of kids, if they're just standing around with nothing to do, are going to find something to do, and it's usually not going to be positive. So let's give them something to do. Let's let them go to the community centers. Let's give them more in the community centers than just sports. Let's have arts and crafts. Let's have music. Let's have, you know, college prep. Let's have, you know, let's really use our facilities to try to give these kids a chance to stay out of trouble. And I believe that if we focus on that and we start to give them a first-rate education, we got to stop playing games about who can give the best education, whether it's charter or public or ASD or private, and let's focus on giving every kid an education that prepares them to be able to move on beyond high school and either go to a trade school or go to a junior college or go to a four-year college so that they will be prepared for the future. Atlanta decided in the 50s that its motto was going to be the city too busy to hate. When all the rest of the South was going through civil rights upheaval and turmoil, Atlanta didn't. Atlanta was home to Dr. King. Atlanta was home to Andy Young. Atlanta was the home. So they went from being the city too busy to hate to being the city of inclusion, to being the city of the Olympics. Now, follow that, because there is something to be said about that not just being a PR piece, but being a reality. Atlanta went from having a non-African American mayor to having a Jewish mayor, Ivan Allen, as a transition mayor, to having Maynard Jackson. Atlanta went from, this is too busy, the city too busy to hate. Atlanta went from being a regional city to being a national city, where they attracted, because they were seen as being progressive, industry from around the country to become the regional headquarters for so many national companies. This was in the 60s and the 70s. Fast forward, after Maynard has been elected mayor, Atlanta's two major industries decide that they want to be world leaders. And so Coca-Cola and Delta decide that they're going to do whatever it takes to basically elevate their status in the world. And one of the things that they did was they decided to build something that was called Hartsfield International Airport, which at the time was a huge project. And before they could build it, the mayor of Atlanta, Maynard Jackson, basically insisted that that project include 35% minority participation, which was, if I'm not mistaken, the airport was $500 million when it was being built. It may have been more than that, but 35%. It set a tone in Atlanta that we're going to be inclusive, that African Americans are going to have to be a part of the progress of Atlanta. And to their credit, the big business folk, Delta in Atlanta and Coca-Cola, said, we'll do it. Now, I'm not saying they didn't do it without a push. I'm not saying they didn't do it reluctantly, but in the end, they did it. As a result, Atlanta laid the groundwork for black inclusion, African American inclusion in the procurement of goods and services, not only from the city of Atlanta, but in the Atlanta area, and a tone was set. They went from being a national city to being an international city. Delta flew international routes, and Delta flew almost all of its routes in America go through Atlanta. It now has some hubs, but that was the plan. It made Hartsfield International one of the 5 busiest airports in America. Atlanta became a hub. But they went from there to having a president, Jimmy Carter, who then appointed Andy Young, as his UN secretary, which gave birth to the idea that Atlanta could then be an international city and could go after the Olympics. So becoming a city of inclusion allowed the world to see Atlanta as a different place in Southern America that was different from the rest of the South, which allowed it then to present itself to the rest of the world as, we understand in order to host an Olympics, we must be viewed as a tolerant and inclusionary city. And so Atlanta went after the Olympics, and they held the Olympics. So the transition from a southern city too busy to hate to a city that was the New York of the South, that's what they called themselves for a long time, to being the city that hosted the Olympics, is a process of inclusion. That's what I'm getting at in terms of Memphis having to do. We have not unleashed the productivity of a huge group in Memphis. That is the majority African American community that has not been prepared to a skilled level to take advantage of new opportunities. And so when we look around, we don't see that. Crime is a function of opportunity. While we can all agree that there are some people who won't do right no matter what, and while we can also agree that everybody that grows up poor does not get into crime, I don't think too many people will dispute that there's a correlation between poverty and crime. Memphis is the #1, the poorest city in America. Does it surprise anyone that we have the crime that we have? It shouldn't. Until we begin to create the opportunities that we need to create, then that's what you're going to get. And the unfortunate thing is that perception then takes over, and those industries which could come and those people who would come, who may be able to uplift the standard of living and the quality of life, see it as a place that they don't want to be. So you don't find a rush to to Memphis like you do Atlanta. You don't find people wanting to come here as you do maybe a Charlotte or some other cities in the South. And so that's sort of the Atlanta versus Memphis scenario. We have to figure out a way in Memphis to convince those who are in leadership that we are all better off the more inclusive we are and the more opportunities we create for all. And I think if we begin to make an investment in that process, invest in people right now, then yes, it's going to cost a little bit right now, but I think it will pay dividends 10, 15, 20 years from now.
Are you optimistic for the future of Memphis?
I am cautiously optimistic. I am optimistic because I believe that Memphis remains a city that is nowhere near achieving its potential. I am convinced that Memphis has the ability to eclipse Atlanta. I am convinced that Memphis has the ability to be one of the greatest cities in the world. But I am also convinced that if we don't start addressing some of the symptoms that have now persisted in the root causes of many of our issues, that we will be in the next 20 years discussing the same problems and circumstances in a worse situation, because the world is not standing still while we refuse to address our internal issues. I think that if we ever agree that we're going to ensure that every person in this community has value, that they're entitled to develop to their fullest, that we're going to invest in helping them have that opportunity, and that we then are going to insist upon them to reach back and help someone else and to do all they can to help their community. I think if we can ever reach that point to where we are all committed to that and we appreciate that there is that interconnection, then I think Memphis will surprise the world in what we're able to be and become. I think that there are some of us who are trying to prod us in that direction. I think there are some of us who believe that we're beginning to reach enough people who agree. And I think I'm hopeful that through your efforts and other efforts like yours, that people will say, hey, let's begin to look at what we need to do, and let's start doing the things that we ought to do to make Memphis the premier city in this country and one of the greatest in the world.